Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Stone County. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The autumn wind swept across the Ozark Highlands, carrying with it the scent of decaying leaves and something else. Something that the residents of Stone County, Missouri, would later describe as the unmistakable presence of dread. It was 1953 when the Knox brothers first arrived in Galena, the small county seat nestled along the James River. Samuel and Thomas Knox, men in their late 30s, purchased the old Hendrickson property on the outskirts of town, a weathered two-story farmhouse that had remained vacant for nearly a decade following the previous owner's mysterious departure. According to county records filed in the courthouse archives, the Hendrickson family had abandoned the property in 1944, leaving behind most of their possessions with no forwarding address. The prevailing explanation involved financial hardship, but some locals whispered of strange occurrences that had driven the family away. These rumors, like many in small communities, remained unsubstantiated but persistent. The farmhouse, situated on 20 acres of partly wooded land approximately 3 miles from the Galena town square, had fallen into disrepair during its years of abandonment. The Knox brothers purchased the property for a surprisingly low sum, according to the deed transfer recorded on September 17, 1953. The document, now yellowed with age in the county records office, bears both brothers' signatures, Samuel's neat and precise, Thomas's noticeably more erratic. Longtime county clerk Margaret Simmons, who processed the transaction, later recalled that Thomas seemed reluctant to sign, his hand trembling visibly until his brother placed a firm hand on his shoulder. There was something odd about those two from the beginning, Simmons told investigators in 1954. They didn't seem like brothers, really, more like handler and patient. The Knox brothers kept to themselves, which wasn't particularly unusual in this rural community, where privacy was respected, and neighbors often lived miles apart. Samuel, the elder by 2 years, would occasionally venture into town for supplies, nodding politely to locals, but rarely engaging in conversation. Thomas was seldom seen. When asked about his brother, Samuel would simply state that Thomas preferred the solitude of their property and had little interest in socializing. Local merchant Wilson Davis, owner of the Galena General Store from 1937 to 1962, kept a ledger of purchases that provides insight into the brothers' early days in Stone County. Samuel Knox made regular purchases of construction materials, lumber, nails, cement, piping, suggesting extensive renovations to the old Hendrickson place. More curious were his repeated purchases of recording equipment, batteries, and unusual quantities of copper wire. When Davis inquired about these items, Samuel explained he was documenting regional dialects for a university research project. I asked which university, Davis later stated in a deposition, and he said various institutions and changed the subject. It wasn't my place to pry, but it did seem peculiar. What made the brothers the subject of local speculation wasn't their reserved nature, but rather the unusual hours they kept. Lights would burn in the farmhouse windows well past midnight, and the sound of a truck engine often disturbed the pre-dawn silence. Some residents living near the old wire road reported seeing their vehicle making its way toward the abandoned marble quarry several times a month, always during the darkest hours of night. The quarry in question, operational from 1892 to 1937, had been a significant source of employment in the county before economic hardship forced its closure. Located approximately 7 miles from the Knox property, the quarry featured several deep shafts that reached unusual depths for marble extraction, a peculiarity noted in geological surveys conducted in the 1940s. These surveys, commissioned by the state as part of post-war resource assessment, indicated anomalous formations and unexplained thermal variations at the deeper levels, though these findings were relegated to appendices and largely overlooked. "They're just night owls," Sheriff Harold Wilkins told concerned citizens who mentioned the brothers' peculiar schedule during town gatherings. "Some folks work better after dark." The sheriff, a pragmatic man who had served Stone County since the end of World War II, saw no reason to investigate the Knox brothers based solely on their preference for nocturnal activity. They paid their taxes, caused no disturbances, and had no record of trouble with the law. In the sheriff's estimation, that made them model citizens. Wilkins, a decorated veteran who had returned to his hometown after service in the European theater, prided himself on running a quiet, orderly county. His leadership style favored minimal intervention in citizens' personal affairs unless clear evidence of wrongdoing existed. This philosophy, while generally effective in maintaining community harmony, would later be scrutinized in light of the Knox case. A deeper background check, which wasn't performed until after the incidents of 1954, would have revealed several curious details about the brothers. Both had indeed served in Korea, as they occasionally mentioned to locals, but military records indicated they hadn't served in combat roles. Instead, they had been assigned to a little-known research division operating under Army intelligence. The nature of their work remained classified, with service records showing only vague descriptions such as specialized acoustic research and subterranean detection methodologies. Prior to their arrival in Stone County, the brothers had lived briefly in 7 different locations across 4 states, never staying in one place longer than 8 months. This pattern of movement began immediately following their honorable discharges from military service in early 1952. The reason for this nomadic existence would never be conclusively determined, though psychological evaluations conducted after Samuel's death suggested a progressive paranoia that manifested as a need to stay ahead of something they believed was pursuing them. It wasn't until the spring of 1954 that the first truly troubling incident associated with the Knox brothers occurred. Marjorie Wilson, a widow who operated the telephone switchboard in Galena, reported receiving a strange call just after midnight on April 17th. According to the official statement she provided to Sheriff Wilkins, the caller didn't identify himself, but she recognized Thomas Knox's distinctive deep voice and slight stutter, a voice she had heard only once before when he had called to have telephone service connected at the farmhouse. "He seemed frantic," Marjorie later told the Stone County Oracle. "He kept saying, 'It's in the walls now. God help us, it's in the walls.' Then the line went dead." When Sheriff Wilkins drove out to the Knox property the following morning to check on the brothers' welfare, Samuel answered the door looking tired but composed. He explained that his brother had been suffering from night terrors, a condition that had plagued him since their service in Korea. The sheriff, himself a veteran who understood how war could haunt a man, accepted the explanation and departed with a recommendation that Thomas see Dr. Lawrence at the county hospital. The transcript of this exchange, reconstructed from Sheriff Wilkins' notes, reveals subtle inconsistencies that went unnoticed at the time. While explaining his brother's condition, Samuel repeatedly referred to the research and our findings before catching himself and redirecting the conversation. He also insisted on speaking to the sheriff outside the house, claiming Thomas was finally sleeping after a difficult night. The sheriff observed that despite this claim, the curtains in an upstairs window moved several times during their conversation, suggesting someone was watching. "I should have pushed harder," Wilkins later confessed to his deputy, Richard Holloway. "Something felt off, but I had no cause to force the issue. Man's entitled to his privacy, even if his brother's going through some troubles." For several weeks following the peculiar phone call, the Knox brothers seemed to attract less attention. Samuel was seen more frequently in town, even joining the regulars at Clayton's Diner for coffee on occasion. He spoke little of his brother, but assured anyone who inquired that Thomas was improving with rest. The rhythms of the small county seat continued uninterrupted, with most residents focusing on the upcoming summer and the promise of tourist dollars from vacationers drawn to the newly developed Table Rock Lake area. During this period of apparent normalcy, however, Samuel Knox made several significant purchases that would later be considered relevant to the case. Records from hardware stores in both Galena and the larger town of Branson, 20 miles away, show he acquired sophisticated recording equipment, including a German-made reel-to-reel system that was unusual for a private citizen to own. He also ordered specialized microphones through Wilson Davis's General Store, devices designed for environmental monitoring that could detect sounds beyond the range of human hearing. Perhaps most tellingly, he requested special ordering of several geological texts and maps of Stone County's subsurface features through the local library. Librarian Eleanor Jenkins recalled that Samuel seemed particularly interested in a 1938 survey that documented unusual limestone formations beneath the southeastern portion of the county, precisely where the Knox property was located. He spent hours copying certain pages, Jenkins later testified. When I mentioned that he could simply check out the book, he said he needed to verify the information against our findings. I assumed he meant he and his brother were amateur geologists. On June 8, 1954, local farmer Ellis Dawson reported something unusual while retrieving a stray cow that had wandered onto the Knox property. Approaching the barn behind the farmhouse, Dawson noticed a series of narrow trenches dug in precise lines emanating from the structure like spokes on a wheel. The trenches, approximately 6 inches wide and of varying depths, extended several hundred feet in different directions. When Dawson encountered Samuel Knox exiting the barn, he inquired about the strange excavation. "Drainage problems," Samuel reportedly explained, his tone cordial but clipped. "The previous owner let the water table issues go unaddressed. We're installing a new system." Though Dawson found the explanation plausible, many properties in that area struggled with water management. He later told Sheriff Wilkins that something about the encounter left him uneasy. "It wasn't what he said," Dawson recalled. "It was how he watched me leave. Like he was making sure I didn't stray from the path back to my property." Dawson also reported another detail that initially seemed insignificant: a rhythmic thumping sound coming from inside the barn, like someone hammering, but in a pattern, almost like Morse code, but not quite. When he asked about it, Samuel explained they were repairing farm equipment, yet Dawson observed no vehicles or machinery around the property that would require such work. The sheriff, respecting property rights and finding no cause for official concern, made a mental note but took no action. Later, this decision would be scrutinized extensively in regional newspapers when the truth about the Knox brothers emerged. As summer stretched into fall, residents living nearest to the Knox property began reporting unusual sounds carrying through the night air. Distant metallic clanging, the whine of power tools, and occasionally what some described as wailing, echoed across the hills. Most dismissed these reports as the wind playing tricks or the natural sounds of the rural landscape magnified by stillness. A few speculated that the Knox brothers were engaged in some sort of manufacturing operation, perhaps something to do with the region's long history of lead mining. The Carmichael family, whose farm adjoined the Knox property to the north, kept a detailed log of disturbances beginning in late July 1954. Martha Carmichael, a meticulous woman who served as church secretary for the Galena Baptist Church, noted not only the sounds but the precise times they occurred. Her records, later collected as evidence, revealed a curious pattern. The disturbances almost always began at 3:17 a.m. and continued for exactly 43 minutes. This specificity, investigators would later suggest, indicated something far more deliberate than random maintenance or construction. "The consistency is what troubled me," Martha wrote in her journal on September 3, 1954. "Nature isn't precise like that, and last night I could swear I heard someone or something calling my name from the direction of the Knox place. Richard says I was dreaming, but I know what I heard." Thomas Knox hadn't been seen in Galena for nearly 4 months when local mail carrier Walter Jenkins noted that the brothers' mailbox had begun to overflow. After 3 days of accumulated mail, Jenkins followed postal protocol and reported the situation to Sheriff Wilkins. On October 23, 1954, the sheriff made his second official visit to the Knox property. The day was unseasonably cold for October in the Ozarks, with a thin layer of frost covering the ground despite the mid-morning sun. Deputy Richard Holloway, who accompanied Sheriff Wilkins, later described the approach to the farmhouse as unnervingly silent. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Like everything was holding its breath, he noted in his personal account of the day, a document discovered among his effects after his death in 1971. What he discovered would become the foundation of Stone County folklore for generations to come. The farmhouse door stood ajar, swinging gently in the autumn breeze. Sheriff Wilkins called out as he approached, announcing his presence as required by law. Receiving no response, he stepped into the front hall, immediately struck by two things: the distinctive odor of chemical preservatives, similar to those used in taxidermy, and the absolute stillness of the house. No creaking floorboards, no ticking clocks, no sounds of habitation whatsoever. The interior of the house appeared meticulously organized, almost sterile. The living room contained minimal furniture, 2 chairs, a small table, no personal items or decorations. The kitchen was similarly austere, with clean countertops and empty cabinets. It was the cellar door, slightly ajar with light spilling from below, that drew the sheriff's attention. According to his official report, filed later that day, Sheriff Wilkins descended the stairs and discovered what he initially believed to be a scientific laboratory. Tables lined the walls, supporting an array of equipment: microscopes, recording devices, glass containers filled with unidentified liquids, and detailed journals filled with handwritten notes. At the center of the room stood a large metal container, resembling a modified water heater, connected to a complex system of pipes that disappeared into holes drilled through the stone foundation walls. Deputy Holloway's unofficial account provides additional details omitted from the sheriff's report. The walls of the cellar were covered with maps of the region's subsurface features, with certain areas circled in red ink. Dozens of recordings were meticulously labeled with dates and times, organized chronologically on shelves built specifically for this purpose. Most disturbing were the transcripts pinned to a large cork board containing what appeared to be conversations, though Holloway noted that only one voice was identifiable as human. It was behind this apparatus that the sheriff discovered Samuel Knox. The man sat upright in a wooden chair, his clothing immaculate, his posture unnaturally rigid. He was deceased, had been for several days, according to the county coroner's subsequent examination. Cause of death: self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. A revolver lay on the floor beside him. The coroner's report, filed on October 25, 1954, noted several anomalies. Despite the apparent cause of death, very little blood was found at the scene. Samuel's body showed signs of significant weight loss and sleep deprivation, with his physical condition suggesting someone who had been under extreme duress for an extended period. Most peculiar was the expression frozen on his face, which the coroner described as not consistent with suicide victims, but rather indicating extreme alertness, as if he were listening intently to something at the moment of death. Of Thomas Knox, there was no sign. The discovery prompted what would become the most extensive investigation in Stone County's history up to that point. State police were called in, and forensic specialists from Springfield examined the farmhouse and surrounding property. The trenches observed by Ellis Dawson months earlier were excavated further, revealing an elaborate network of pipes leading from the cellar to various points on the property, terminating in what investigators described as listening stations, metal containers embedded in the ground, each containing recording equipment. These stations, positioned at precise intervals creating a grid pattern across the property, contained some of the most sophisticated audio monitoring equipment available in the 1950s. Each station was powered by a combination of batteries and small generators, allowing for continuous operation. Most curiously, The microphones were positioned facing downward, inserted into narrow shafts, drilled several feet into the limestone bedrock. A specialist from the University of Missouri who examined the setup remarked that it resembled acoustic monitoring systems used to detect underground nuclear tests, but modified for much closer range and higher sensitivity. When asked what the brothers might have been listening for, the specialist could offer no definitive explanation. The journals found in the cellar provided the most disturbing insights into the brothers' activities. Written primarily in Samuel's precise handwriting, they documented what the brothers believed to be a presence beneath the property, something they claimed to have first detected while digging a new well shortly after purchasing the land. The earliest entries described only anomalous sounds and rhythmic vibrations that Samuel initially attributed to underground water sources or distant mining operations. October 12, 1953. The sound continues intermittently, strongest between 3 and 4 hounds a.m. Thomas suggests abandoned mining equipment settling, but the pattern suggests otherwise. We'll monitor for another week before drawing conclusions. October 17, 1953. Definite pattern confirmed. The sequence repeats precisely. 3 sharp taps followed by a scraping sound, then silence for exactly 12 minutes before beginning again. Natural phenomena don't maintain such regularity. Something else is causing this. As the journal entries progressed, however, the tone grew increasingly paranoid. Samuel described the sounds as deliberate and responsive, suggesting that whatever produced them was reacting to the brothers' movements above ground. By early June 1954, Samuel was recording detailed communication attempts, using the pipe network to transmit sounds into the earth and documenting what he perceived as responses. June 3, 1954, breakthrough. When we transmitted the sequence back, mimicking exactly what we've been hearing, there was an immediate change. The response was faster, more complex. Thomas believes we've established first contact. I remain skeptical, but the evidence suggests intelligence. June 17, 1954. Thomas insists on establishing a regular communication schedule. We now transmit at precisely 2:30 a.m. and receive responses at 3:17 a.m. The increasing complexity cannot be coincidence. We are conversing with something below. The nature of this something was never clearly articulated in the journals. Samuel variously referred to it as the entity, the presence, and occasionally the colony, suggesting multiple organisms. In later entries, he speculated that it might be a previously undocumented subterranean species, or something that has always been there, waiting for someone to listen. Most troubling were entries that hinted at the brothers' growing belief that whatever dwelled beneath their property was attempting to find a way up. Thomas Knox appeared less frequently in the journal entries as time passed, with Samuel noting his brother's growing reluctance to participate in the research. The final mention of Thomas, dated September 12, 1954, simply stated, "T has gone to commune directly. I fear what returns may not be him." A series of entries following this statement revealed Samuel's increasing isolation and paranoia. September 14, 1954. The voice on the recordings is changing. It sounds more like Thomas each day, but the things it says, these are not my brother's words. September 23, 1954. It knows I'm alone now. The communications have become continuous. No longer restricted to the early morning hours. It speaks all day, all night, always in Thomas's voice, always asking me to open the way. October 10, 1954. I've sealed the main shaft in the barn. The barrier won't hold forever, but it should by time. I've sent the critical recordings to people who will understand their significance. If I don't survive, at least the truth will. The final entry, dated October 20th, 1954, 3 days before Sheriff Wilkins discovered Samuel's body, contained only a single sentence. I hear scratching in the walls. No trace of Thomas Knox was ever found, despite an extensive search of the property and surrounding areas. His disappearance remains officially unsolved in Stone County records. The investigation concluded with a determination that Samuel Knox had suffered from a shared delusional disorder, likely exacerbated by isolation and possibly triggered by their wartime experiences. The presence they believed existed beneath their property was dismissed as a manifestation of psychological disturbance, perhaps influenced by local mining history and underground cave systems common throughout the Ozarks. However, certain details uncovered during the investigation were difficult to reconcile with the official explanation. The sophisticated nature of the monitoring equipment, far beyond what would be typical for civilian use in the 1950s, suggested the brothers had access to specialized knowledge and resources. The precise positioning of the listening stations, which a University of Missouri geologist confirmed, aligned perfectly with a natural limestone formation known as the Chambers, a series of interconnected caverns mapped in 1938 but not widely documented, implied methodical research rather than delusional behavior. Most problematic for the official narrative was the discovery of a narrow vertical shaft in the barn, approximately 3 feet in diameter, which had been recently sealed with concrete. When investigators broke through this seal, they found a professionally constructed shaft extending at least 80 feet into the limestone before becoming too narrow for further exploration without specialized equipment. Tool marks on the walls suggested recent excavation, consistent with Samuel's journal reference to the main shaft. Due to safety concerns and limited resources, the investigation team decided not to pursue further exploration of the shaft. It was resealed with concrete and the barn door welded shut, a fact documented in the official report but not widely publicized. The case might have been relegated to a footnote in county history had it not been for what happened during the property auction in the spring of 1955, when the county sold the Knox estate to settle outstanding tax obligations. Martin Green, a retired engineer from Springfield who purchased the farmhouse at a significant discount, hired local workers to remove the elaborate pipe system and fill in the trenches before moving in. During this process, one worker, Joseph Carter, reported hearing voices emanating from one of the pipes. "Like whispers," he told the Stone County Oracle, "but not in any language I've ever heard." Carter quit the job the same day and reportedly refused to set foot on the property again. Carter, a Korean War veteran known for his steady temperament, gave a more detailed account to close friends at the Galena Veterans Association. According to those who heard his story, Carter claimed the voices spoke in English, but with unusual cadence and pronunciation, like someone learning the language from a book rather than from conversation. More disturbing, he insisted, one of the voices addressed him by name, despite there being no way for anyone to know he was listening to that particular pipe at that moment. Green dismissed Carter's claims as superstition and completed the renovations himself. He lived in the house for just 7 months before abruptly selling the property at a loss and returning to Springfield. When asked why he was leaving, Green offered only a cryptic explanation. "The house has poor acoustics for sleeping." Friends and associates of Green noted significant changes in his behavior during his brief residency at the former Knox property. Previously known for his rational, methodical approach to problems, Green became increasingly irrational, developing a fear of enclosed spaces and refusing to sleep in darkness. Medical records from the Springfield Medical Center indicate he sought treatment for auditory disturbances in December 1955, telling doctors he was experiencing voices that speak only when you're not listening for them. The property changed hands 5 more times between 1956 and 1968, with no owner remaining longer than 18 months. A pattern emerged among these subsequent owners: initial enthusiasm about the property's potential, followed by increasing isolation, reports of sleep disturbances, and finally, abrupt departure. Several owners reported undertaking renovations to address structural noises, particularly in the walls, though building inspectors found no issues with the house's construction. Eventually, the farmhouse was demolished and the land remained undeveloped until the county purchased it in the early 1970s for a planned expansion of the regional water treatment facility. During groundbreaking in 1972, workers uncovered portions of the Knox brothers pipe network that had been missed during previous excavations. More significantly, they discovered a narrow vertical shaft behind where the farmhouse had stood, a shaft that, according to survey equipment, extended at least 300 feet into the earth before becoming impassable. The project supervisor, Edward Collins, ordered a small camera lowered into the shaft to assess its condition. The footage, later stored in county archives before mysteriously disappearing in 1975, reportedly showed a series of horizontal tunnels branching off from the main shaft at various depths. Most curious were what Collins described as modifications to the tunnel walls, smooth, regular indentations that didn't appear natural or man-made, but rather like something had been systematically removed from the stone. County records indicate the shaft was promptly sealed with concrete and the water treatment project relocated to an alternative site. No official explanation for this decision was ever provided to the public. The most intriguing postscript to the Knox brothers case emerged in 1963, when a routine inventory of evidence at the Stone County Sheriff's Department revealed that several items from the investigation had gone missing, including Samuel Knox's journals and the audio recordings recovered from the listening stations. The theft, if that's what it was never solved, though some speculated that the materials had been removed by government officials interested in the brothers' research. This theory gained traction when locals reported seeing unmarked vehicles with government plates near the abandoned Knox property in the spring of 1963. Doris Jenkins, who operated a small diner on the outskirts of Galena, told the Stone County Oracle that several men in suits had visited over the course of a week, asking detailed questions about the Knox brothers and particularly about any unusual occurrences associated with their property. "They weren't from around here," Jenkins stated. "They showed badges, but I couldn't tell you what agency they represented." One of them asked if anyone in town had copies of recordings the brothers made. Seemed very interested in that particular detail. Adding to the mystery, a former deputy named Richard Holloway came forward in 1967 with a strange claim. Holloway, who had been among the first responders to the Knox property in 1954, stated that before evidence was cataloged, he had listened to a portion of one recording. It wasn't static or earth sounds, he told a journalist from the Springfield Daily News. It was a voice repeating the same phrase over and over. It sounded like Thomas Knox saying, "I should never have gone down. There's no bottom to it." Holloway's statement was largely dismissed, particularly since he had been removed from the force years earlier following a diagnosis of early-onset dementia. Current Sheriff Wilkins declined to comment on the former deputy's claims. What lent Holloway's account unexpected credibility was the discovery among his personal effects after his death in 1971 of a small notebook containing what appeared to be transcriptions of the Knox brothers' recordings. The notebook, written in Holloway's distinctive handwriting, documented several conversations between what he labeled as TK, presumably Thomas Knox, and other. The exchanges were fragmentary and often cryptic. TK, how far does it extend? Other, further than your comprehension permits. TK, are there others like you? Other, we are not like, we are same. TK, what do you want from us? Other, recognition, emergence, completion. The authenticity of these transcriptions could never be verified, as the original recordings remained missing. When contacted about the notebook, Holloway's widow claimed no knowledge of its existence and suggested it might be a product of her husband's declining mental state. The notebook was eventually transferred to the Stone County Historical Society, but disappeared from their archives in 1978. Today, the Knox property remains undeveloped, a patch of overgrown land marked only by a county utilities easement sign. Locals tend to avoid the area, though they'd be hard-pressed to explain exactly why. Some claim that on particularly still nights, especially in autumn, a faint metallic tapping can be heard emanating from the ground, a sound reminiscent of Morse code, though no one has successfully decoded it. In the early 1980s, a group of geology students from the University of Missouri attempted to conduct a comprehensive survey of the area as part of a study on the region's limestone formations. Their request for access was initially approved by the county commissioners, but mysteriously revoked just days before their scheduled visit. When pressed for an explanation, county officials cited unresolved safety concerns related to subsidence issues, a claim the geology department had found dubious given the stable nature of the bedrock in that specific area. What truly happened to the Knox brothers in that farmhouse in 1954 may never be fully understood. Was it simply a case of shared psychosis, two traumatized war veterans descending into paranoid delusion? Or did they discover something in the ancient limestone beneath Stone County, something that perhaps should have remained undisturbed? The official records offer no definitive answer. Samuel Knox's suicide and Thomas Knox's disappearance were eventually classified as tragic outcomes of untreated mental illness, a common problem among veterans in an era when such conditions were poorly understood and heavily stigmatized. Yet for those familiar with the case, questions linger. Why did the county so quickly abandon plans to develop the property? What became of the evidence that disappeared from the sheriff's department? And perhaps most troubling, why have all attempts to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area been denied permits by county officials? In the quiet courthouse in Galena, a single file folder labeled Knox Investigation 1954 sits in the county archive. Much of its contents have been redacted or removed entirely, leaving more questions than answers. The official archivist, when asked about these omissions, provides only a standard response. Documentation deemed irrelevant to the case resolution was removed during file consolidation in 1968. This explanation fails to account for the selective nature of the redactions. Meteorological data, property appraisals, and mundane correspondence remain intact, while all information relating to the brothers' background, the contents of their recordings, and the precise findings at the property have been systematically removed. Even the county coroner's full report on Samuel Knox's death is missing, replaced by a summary document that omits the unusual circumstances noted in contemporary accounts. For the residents of Stone County, the Knox brothers' case serves as a whispered warning about the dangers of obsession and isolation. Parents tell diluted versions to discourage children from exploring abandoned properties. Teenagers dare one another to spend nights near the old Knox land, though few follow through. And occasionally someone will report hearing the distinctive sound of metal striking metal from somewhere beneath the earth, a sound that stops abruptly when acknowledged, as if whatever produces it suddenly realizes it's being listened to. Perhaps that's the most disturbing legacy of the Knox brothers, not what they may have found, but the possibility that it remains there still, waiting beneath the rolling hills of Stone County, gradually working its way toward the surface. In 1969, a geology student from the University of Missouri attempted to include the Knox property in a study of the region's extensive cave systems. His request for access was denied by the county commissioners. His subsequent Freedom of Information request for documents related to the property was similarly rejected, citing ongoing safety concerns. The student, Michael Reeves, later became a respected geologist specializing in subterranean mapping. When asked about the Knox property in a 1987 interview, Reeves offered an unexpected perspective. There are places in the Ozarks where the limestone formations create unusual acoustic phenomena, chambers that can capture and distort sounds from miles away, carrying them through the rock like a natural telephone. It's entirely possible the Knox brothers stumbled upon one such formation and misinterpreted what they were hearing. This explanation gained credence when, in 1992, researchers from the University of Arkansas documented a similar phenomenon in limestone caves near Eureka Springs, just across the Missouri border. Using sensitive equipment, they recorded sounds from a highway nearly 2 miles away being transmitted through specific limestone formations with remarkable clarity. The research team leader, Dr. Elizabeth Cartwright, explicitly referenced the Knox case in her published findings, suggesting it represented an early misunderstood encounter with this acoustic anomaly. However, Dr. Cartwright's attempts to gain access to the Knox property to test her theory were similarly denied by Stone County officials. In a 1993 interview with Scientific American, she expressed frustration with this decision. If there's nothing unusual about the property, why the continued restrictions? It's been nearly 40 years since the incident. Whatever they're concerned about, it isn't public safety. Whether Reeves and Cartwright's explanations account for the full strangeness of the case remains a matter of speculation. What's certain is that something about the Knox brothers and their isolated farmhouse continues to resonate with the people of Stone County. A cautionary tale about the dangers of peering too deeply into the darkness, literal or metaphorical. A curious footnote to the story emerged in 1998 when renovation work on the Stone County Courthouse uncovered a small metal box sealed within a wall cavity. The box, apparently placed there during renovations in the late 1950s, contained several items related to the Knox case. A photograph of the brothers taken shortly after their arrival in Galena, a hand-drawn map of the property showing the locations of all listening stations, and, most intriguingly, a small reel of magnetic tape. When played by technical specialists from the Missouri State Archives, the tape revealed approximately 17 minutes of audio, much of it degraded beyond recovery. What could be discerned included periods of silence, occasional mechanical sounds consistent with recording equipment being adjusted, and brief segments of what sound engineers described as subharmonic resonances, extremely low-frequency sounds at the threshold of human hearing. Most significant was a 43-second segment near the end of the tape, in which a male voice, presumably Thomas Knox, can be heard speaking. The audio quality is poor, but certain phrases are distinguishable. Boy, making contact on a regular basis now? And Samuel doesn't believe it's really communicating, but I've heard it say my name. The recording ends abruptly with what sound analysts described as mechanical failure of the recording device, rather than an intentional stop. County officials promptly classified the materials as historical artifacts and transferred them to a secure storage facility in Jefferson City, where they reportedly remain to this day, unavailable for public examination. Requests to access these materials, filed by various researchers and journalists over the years, have been consistently denied on grounds ranging from preservation concerns to ongoing investigation. For those passing through Galena today, there is little to indicate the disturbing events that unfolded there in the autumn of 1954. The courthouse square maintains its timeless charm, and the Y Bridge spanning the James River offers picturesque views of the surrounding hills. Visitors are more likely to hear about Marvel Cave or the float trips down the James than about two brothers who believed something was communicating with them from beneath the earth. Yet in certain circles, among longtime residents gathering at Clayton's Diner, now renamed but still occupying the same corner of the square, or the elderly patrons of the Stone County Library, mention of the Knox brothers still elicits knowing glances and lowered voices. Some stories are better left untold, says Eleanor Pruitt, whose father worked as a telephone lineman in Galena during the 1950s, not because they aren't true, but because believing them changes how you hear the silence. Perhaps that's the true legacy of Samuel and Thomas Knox. They altered the way some residents of Stone County perceive the ground beneath their feet. In a region honeycombed with caves and underground waterways, they introduced the unsettling possibility that not all spaces below are empty and not all sounds carried through stone are echoes. In 2002, a documentary filmmaker from St. Louis attempted to produce a feature on the Knox case. After initial cooperation from local officials, the project encountered increasingly significant obstacles. Interview subjects withdrew without explanation. Permission to film at locations associated with the case was revoked. Finally, the filmmaker received anonymous phone calls warning him to abandon the project. Though he initially dismissed these as pranks, the specific details mentioned during these calls, including references to unpublished research, convinced him the threats were credible. The documentary was never completed. When asked about his experience years later, the filmmaker remained reluctant to discuss specifics. "Some stories fight being told," he said. "This one fought harder than most." A potentially significant connection emerged in 2005 when military historian Dr. James Whitaker uncovered documents relating to a classified Army intelligence operation codenamed Project Deepwell. According to Whitaker's research, the program, active from 1951 to 1957, focused on subterranean acoustic anomalies with potential military applications. Though most documents remained heavily redacted, Whitaker found references to field teams operating in limestone-rich regions of the American Midwest, including locations in southern Missouri. The timing and geographical focus aligned perfectly with the Knox case, Whitaker noted in a paper published in the Journal of Military History. "While I can't conclusively prove the brothers were associated with Project Deepwell, the circumstantial evidence is compelling." Whitaker's attempts to access more complete records through Freedom of Information Act requests met with limited success. The Department of Defense acknowledged the existence of Project Deepwell, but claimed most records had been destroyed during routine archive purges in the 1970s. The few documents released contained little substantive information beyond confirming the project's general focus on underground acoustic phenomena. In 2007, construction workers breaking ground for a new county records building approximately half a mile from the old Knox property made a peculiar discovery. While excavating the foundation, they uncovered a section of copper pipe identical to those used in the Knox brothers' listening system. The pipe, which clearly extended beyond the construction site in both directions, appeared to be part of a larger network. County officials ordered the pipe removed, and the discovery kept confidential, but several workers discussed it publicly, reigniting local interest in the Knox case. "It doesn't make sense," noted retired geologist Thomas Harlan, who examined photographs of the pipe taken by one of the construction workers. "The Knox property is too far away for their system to have extended to this location. Either their network was far more extensive than documented, or someone else was conducting similar activities." The possibility that the Knox brothers were not alone in their strange research adds another layer to an already complex case. Were they part of a larger operation, perhaps connected to Project Deepwell, or were others independently investigating the same phenomena? The official records provide no answers, and those who might know the truth have largely passed away or remained silent. In 2010, Stone County resident William Jenkins, grandson of the mail carrier who first reported the Knox brothers' overflowing mailbox, discovered an unusual item while clearing out his grandfather's attic following his death. Among old family photographs and personal correspondence was a small metal canister containing a reel of magnetic tape similar to the one found in the courthouse wall in 1998. A handwritten label identified it as Knox Recording for Brevin, Sept. 1954. Jenkins, familiar with the Knox case from local lore, contacted the Stone County Historical Society rather than local authorities. Society Director Margaret Simmons arranged for the tape to be digitized by audio preservation specialists at Missouri State University before county officials became aware of its existence. The resulting digital file, though degraded and difficult to interpret, contained approximately 22 minutes of audio that experts determined was consistent with 1950s recording technology. The content of the tape remains controversial. The first several minutes contain only what sound technicians described as ambient cave acoustics, water dripping, distant echoes, occasional shifting sounds. At approximately 7 minutes into the recording, a male voice, presumed to be Thomas Knox, can be heard narrating his actions. Proceeding deeper into the side passage, the temperature is noticeably higher here, approximately 60 degrees I'd estimate, which is unusual for this depth. What follows is a 4-minute segment of walking sounds, equipment being adjusted, and occasional comments about the surroundings. Thomas notes unusual formations and evidence of recent movement, without elaborating. The quality deteriorates significantly at this point, with increased static and distortion. The most disturbing segment begins approximately 14 minutes into the recording. Thomas's voice becomes urgent, his breathing labored. There's something. I can see movement ahead. The light doesn't reach it properly. I don't think. The next 30 seconds contain indistinct sounds, possibly Thomas moving quickly, and what audio analysts identified as non-human vocalizations in the background. The final segment, barely audible through the distortion, features Thomas speaking in a markedly different tone, calm, almost monotone. I understand now. It's beautiful. Samuel needs to see. Everyone needs to see. I'll bring it back. I'll show them all. The recording ends with a loud metallic sound and several seconds of static. County officials confiscated the digital file and original tape shortly after learning of their existence. The university technicians were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the Jenkins family was advised not to discuss the matter publicly. Nevertheless, descriptions of the recording circulated within the community, further cementing the Knox case in local folklore. The tape's authenticity remains disputed. Critics suggest it could be an elaborate hoax, perhaps created recently using artificially aged materials and deliberately distressed audio. Supporters point to technical analyses that indicate the recording's acoustic properties are consistent with authentic 1950s field recordings, and that the voice patterns match the few verified samples of Thomas Knox's speech from military records. In 2017, ground-penetrating radar technology revealed something unexpected about the geology beneath the former Knox property. A survey conducted as part of a regional groundwater assessment, authorized before county officials realized it would include the restricted area, identified what geologists termed an anomalous void space, approximately 320 feet beneath the surface. Unlike typical limestone caves in the region, this cavity exhibited unusually precise dimensions and orientation, with what appeared to be connecting tunnels extending in several directions. Natural cave formations show organic variability, explained Dr. Rachel Martinez, the geologist who conducted the survey. This structure displays a degree of regularity that's difficult to attribute to natural processes. If I didn't know better, I'd say it looked designed. The survey results were promptly classified by county authorities, but Dr. Martinez discussed her findings at a geological conference before receiving the non-disclosure order. Her professional reputation has suffered since this incident, with former colleagues suggesting her interpretation was sensationalized. She maintains the accuracy of her assessment and continues to seek permission to conduct more detailed investigations of the site. As recently as 2022, unusual incidents continue to be associated with the area surrounding the former Knox property. Local resident Michael Carpenter reported experiencing car trouble while driving past the location late one evening in April of that year. When he pulled over to check the engine, he heard what he described as a voice calling from somewhere in the field, a voice that, disturbingly, addressed him by name, despite there being no visible person nearby. It sounded like it was coming from underground, Carpenter told friends afterward, like someone was speaking through a pipe or a vent. I got out of there as fast as I could. He didn't report the incident to authorities, fearing he wouldn't be taken seriously, but his account spread through the community, reviving interest in the decades-old case. The Knox brothers case exemplifies how some mysteries resist resolution, persisting in the liminal space between documented fact and folklore. The available evidence, fragmentary, often contradictory, increasingly obscured by time, allows for multiple interpretations. Was it a tragic case of shared delusion, a classified military operation gone wrong? Or did the brothers genuinely discover something beneath the Ozark Hills that defied conventional understanding? Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that the truth incorporates elements of all these explanations. The Knox brothers may indeed have suffered from psychological disturbances that colored their perception of natural phenomena. They may also have been involved in classified research that brought them to Stone County for specific, undisclosed purposes, and they may, in the process, have encountered something underground that neither their military training nor their scientific approach had prepared them to comprehend. For contemporary residents of Stone County, the Knox case represents more than just a curious historical footnote. It embodies a particular kind of rural American mystery, one embedded in the landscape itself, inseparable from the limestone hills and flowing waters that define the region. Like the best folk tales, it contains elements of truth wrapped in layers of speculation, each generation adding its own embellishments while the core narrative persists. Every place has its stories, notes local historian Robert Jenkins. What makes the Knox case different is how it refuses to be simply a story. There are too many unanswered questions, too many tangible pieces that don't fit neatly into a tale of two disturbed brothers. Something happened here in 1954 that we still don't fully understand. As night falls over the rolling hills of Stone County, many residents still find themselves occasionally pausing, heads slightly tilted, listening for something they hope never to hear. The faint metallic tapping that signals something below has turned its attention upward toward the thin barrier of earth that separates our world from whatever the Knox brothers discovered in the darkness beneath. In the words of Thomas Knox, transcribed from the final recording he made before his disappearance, the deepest truth isn't that something waits below. The deepest truth is that it has always been there, patiently listening, learning our rhythms, our language, our vulnerabilities. And someday, perhaps soon, it will no longer be content merely to listen. For those who know where to look, the evidence of the Knox brothers' passage through Stone County remains visible. The overgrown foundation of their farmhouse, barely discernible among encroaching vegetation. The sealed shaft in what was once their barn, now surrounded by warning signs declaring it a geological hazard area. The collection of their papers in the county archive, most pages redacted or removed entirely. Less tangible but equally persistent is the silence that surrounds certain aspects of the case. The reluctance of officials to discuss specific details, the missing evidence, the restricted access to the property. This institutional silence speaks as eloquently as any document about the possibility that something about the Knox case remains relevant, even dangerous, nearly 70 years later. The most effective buried secrets, Samuel Knox wrote in his final journal entry, are those that continue to move beneath the surface, creating ripples just subtle enough to be dismissed as imagination. In Stone County, those ripples continue, and in the quietest hours of night, when the modern world's constant noise recedes, some say you can still hear a faint tapping from below, a patient, persistent signal from something that has all the time in the world to wait.